Welcome, everyone. Today we're diving into a theory that really shakes the foundations of what we know about early Christianity, specifically the idea that James the Just might have been the real founder of the movement.
Wow, that's intriguing. So instead of the usual narrative of Jesus, Peter, and Paul, we're looking at James, the actual brother of Jesus?
Exactly. It's like, picture this. The traditional story teaches us that Peter built the church while Paul spread the gospel to the Gentiles. But what if, all along, the true pioneer was James, a man revered by early believers and even respected by the Pharisees?
Indeed. Right. And I guess the evidence points to James being so prominent that even historians like Josephus took notice of his death, calling it significant enough to record it?
Yes, indeed. Josephus notes that James was stoned under high priestly orders, a really political and drastic move. It underscores how major a figure he was, especially compared to, say, Peter, who doesn't get that kind of historical note.
That's quite something. I mean, if James was just a minor disciple, why would Josephus even bother to mention him, right?
Precisely. And it gets more fascinating. Early texts, such as fragments from the Gospel of the Hebrews and Eusebius reporting Hegesippus's accounts, all point to James being called oblius, or a sort of, bulwark for the people.
Yeah, that's a strong title. So his role wasn't just administrative then?
No, it was far more. Think of it like this. It's as if James was the heart of the original Jewish Christian movement. His leadership emphasized a connection to the Torah and a strict observance of Jewish law. This stands in sharp contrast with Paul's theology, which veered away from those roots.
That contrast really seems to split the early movement right down the middle. How does Eisenman, the scholar behind this theory, put it?
Eisenman argues that there was a sort of ideological battle. On one side, you've got James upholding the Jewish customs, saying faith without works is dead, and on the other side, Paul promoting a vision of Jesus that was more universal, detached from Jewish law.
Absolutely.
It's almost like a theological rivalry, you know?
Wow, that's kind of like two competing blueprints for what Christianity should be. A very different picture than what we normally hear.
Exactly. It's almost as if James represents the faithful, Torah-anchored foundation of Jesus' original message, while Paul is seen as the innovator who reshaped that narrative, perhaps even compromised it, to appeal to a more Greco-Roman audience.
But, doesn't that raise a question? If Paul's version was so appealing to the Roman world, why do we feel such a pull towards a more authentic, serious, James-led movement?
That's a good point. On one side, Paul's adaptation allowed Christianity to flourish in a vast empire, but on the other, it led to a dilution of, the original Jewish resistance and reformative spirit James embodied.
Right, interesting dichotomy. And then there's the issue with the Book of Acts, isn't there? I mean, some argue that Acts is essentially a piece of propaganda to smooth over these internal conflicts.
Absolutely. Eisenman calls Acts a whitewashed history where the real tensions between James, Peter, and Paul are glossed over, turning what was actually a tumultuous power struggle into a harmonious boardroom meeting, if you can believe that.
It's almost as if the narrative was re-edited to fit a more palatable story for an empire, right?
Exactly. And there are, fringe texts like the Clementine recognitions that even hint at Paul's problematic role, sometimes describing violence or ideological betrayal
That's a bold
against
claim
James.
indeed. Now, one of the most controversial parts of Eisenman's theory is the connection between James and the Dead Sea Scrolls, correct?
Yes, this is where things get really wild. Eisenman speculates that James, leading a sort of anti-Roman Torah observant group, might have connections with the Qumran community, the very group behind the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's like he's proposing that the scrolls, traditionally attributed to the Essenes, were actually part of a radical movement aligned with James.
Wow. So he's essentially saying James was not only a leader of a religious faction, but also the mastermind behind a broader revolutionary movement?
Precisely, it implies that James was the spiritual architect of a revolution, a rebel prophet who stood against both Roman imperialism and the dilution of his movement's original ideals.
Right, that really undermines the sanitized church narrative. But here's a thought. Don't you think this interpretation might be a bit, speculative? I mean, equating the Qumran community with James's followers seems like a leap.
Yes, that's been a main point of criticism. Critics argue that Eisenman reads too much into limited and sometimes ambiguous evidence. They contend that his connections between James and the Dead Sea Scrolls are, tenuous at best.
Fair criticism indeed. It's definitely a stretch, but I guess that's what makes the debate so riveting. Challenging established views forces us to re-examine our assumptions.
Exactly. For Eisenman, the key takeaway is that James, after his death in 62 CE, was almost entirely erased from what became Orthodox Christianity. His vision, grounded in the Temple, Torah law, and anti-Roman sentiment, was supplanted by Paul's more flexible, empire-friendly gospel.
Yes, that's a paradigm shift. And that shift had enormous consequences. When Constantine adopted Christianity as the state religion centuries later, it was Paul's version, a version really far removed from the original revolutionary message that James supposedly stood for.
Right. So, ultimately, this theory forces us to ask, who really gets to write the history? And it challenges us to consider, if the true essence of Christianity might have been very different from what tradition holds.
Absolutely fascinating. It really makes you wonder, if we peel back these layers, what does the authentic Christianity look like? Was it a message of unwavering political resistance and deep commitment to Jewish law, as represented by James, rather than the universal message of grace attributed to Paul?
That's exactly the debate, and it has profound implications for modern faith, for how we understand historical change, and even for our cultural identity. It's like, do you want an authentic recipe that's been handed down for generations, or a remix that's been
kind of
altered
like choosing
to suit
between
a
a
broad
traditional
audience?
dish and a fusion twist. I love that analogy, and it definitely gets you thinking about the cost of that change. Was the original message sacrificed for, political expediency and wider appeal?
Exactly. It's a trade-off. The original movement was rooted in rebellious authenticity and a close connection to Jewish practice, while Paul's version allowed for greater acceptance and growth across different cultures, even if it meant letting go of some original ideals.
Now, given all this, do you think there's any chance for a revival or a reappraisal of James's legacy in modern theological thought?
That's an interesting question. I mean, even mainstream scholars acknowledge that James mattered, even if he's been overshadowed. There's a growing movement to re-examine his contributions, and what that might mean for understanding the roots of Christianity.
Definitely food for thought. But there will always be those who argue that Paul's reinterpretation provided the necessary flexibility to sustain the faith through complex, evolving societies.
Yes, that's the counterpoint. Some argue that while James's message was pure, it might not have been adaptable enough for a growing, diverse empire. I mean, if you're trying to spread a movement across different cultures, you kind of need a version that's, more universal in its appeal. Something Paul managed to provide.
Right, that does have its merits. It's this respectful tension between preserving authenticity and embracing evolution. And honestly, it's that tension that keeps historical debates alive and vibrant.
Absolutely. Whether you lean towards James's tormented revolutionary vision or Paul's transformative vision, the discussion itself opens up new perspectives on, how religious movements evolve, how power and politics intertwine with belief, and just how, history is written.
So true. And really, that's what makes this whole topic so compelling. Challenging the orthodox narrative and understanding that history may not be as clear-cut as it seems.
Exactly. It's like peeling back an onion. Each layer reveals something unexpected, perhaps even uncomfortable truths about authority, memory, and cultural adaptation.
Yeah, indeed. Well, this discussion has truly been an enlightening journey into the roots of Christianity. It's amazing how re-examining one figure can turn our whole understanding upside down.
Absolutely. Whether or not you're convinced that James was the true founder, it's undeniable that his role was central in the early movement, a legacy that challenges us to think deeper about faith and history.
No doubt about that. Thanks for this engaging conversation. It's given me, and I'm sure our listeners, a lot to ponder about the real origins of Christianity and the power of historical narratives.
Indeed, thanks for joining. Stay curious and keep questioning. History has a way of surprising us, time and time again.